Welcome to How Not to Be a Founder, the podcast where we ditch the highlight reel and get real about the mess, mistakes, and mayhem of startup life. I'm your host, Tom, and this series we're diving into the stories founders usually keep to themselves, the ones that hurt, humbled, and ultimately taught them the most. Today's guest is Luke Davis, whose journey has taken him from agency recruitment at Robert Half to embedded talent at Elements to co-founding Diversifying with his wife. We talk about what it's really like to build a business with your partner, navigating the brutal realities of cash flow, and how everything shifts when you're diagnosed with a life-threatening cancer while running a company. It's raw, real, and packed with wisdom. Let's get into it. Good afternoon, and welcome to Luke Davis, my next guest on How Not to Be a Founder. Luke, how are you?
Really good, Tom. Great to see you.
Good to see you. Good to see you. So you and I go way back. We first worked together, 2013, 2014 at Robert Half?
We did. I remember it well. Yeah, I think I was looking after finance and compliance. I think you were doing creative recruiting and a few other bits and pieces. Yeah.
Yeah. So tell me about your journey since then, what you kind of did and then how you kind of ended up becoming a founder.
Yeah, so after Robert Half, I had this real urge to not work in a corporate anymore. I'd done that a lot. Robert Half, big US company. Before that, I was at Randstad, a huge global recruitment provider. And I really wanted to get a feel for working in a startup or a scale up. So managed to come across a business called Elements, who were doing some really cool stuff, helping tech firms like Spotify, iZettle, and people like that scale around the world. So I joined as employee number 31, which I guess was my first taste of working in a smaller business. That was what I suppose gave me a bit of the, I don't know about bug, but probably the belief, when you go from really big company to smaller company and you get to see firsthand how someone's building a business, that definitely sowed the seed at that time that if I had the chance to try and run my own business, I would. And that was when my wife, who was running a diversity business, said to me, hey, I want to spin out. I want to create a diversity job board. Why don't you come and do that 50-50 with me and come and be a co-founder? So that's been the last 5.5, 6 years.
And can you identify or kind of picture a moment which kind of defined your entrepreneurial mindset?
Yeah, it's an interesting question, defining entrepreneurial mindset, because I believe that all of us to some degree feel a degree of imposter syndrome, even someone like myself, I guess, that was doing it in an industry that I knew really well and had close-hand experiences. I think for me, probably the entrepreneurial mindset bit came in where maybe after a year or two where I'd seen the annual cycles of good months, bad months, lots of money in the bank, not enough money in the bank, being able to pay everyone, knowing you've got enough to pay everyone for the next 4 or 5 months, and then maybe some months where you've not been paid and you're kind of going like, oh, okay, I'm not sure I can actually meet payroll this month. I think once I've done enough of those, and then you hear the things about people saying it's a roller coaster journey and you never switch off, when those words became reality, they actually meant something. I think that's probably when it felt defined for me, I think.
I think that's a really good point to make. I mean, some of the people that we've interviewed kind of said the same thing. It's like everyone hears about what it's like to be a founder, but when you actually experience it, it's very different.
It looks so cool, doesn't it? It's like, check me out. I can make all the decisions. I could be on the golf course on a Friday afternoon if I want. And after a while, I was kind of like, you can do it, but you can't because you're running a business that you're trying to turn into something. And that takes so much focus and passion and energy that you probably aren't going to spend.
Yeah, no, I think there's that thing around, it's the freedom. It's the freedom, the accountability. But then also it's the responsibility is the complete opposite of that. I mean, I think could be Spider-Man where he said, was it with great power comes great responsibility?
Yeah.
Is it what you expected when you first became a founder?
I think in many ways it was. The ability to make your own decisions. I think if you've been somewhere where you are, big reporting lines, matrix structured, sometimes you've got a good idea and it can take months and months to get everybody on the same page to actually move forward with something. That ability to kind of go okay, I've seen an opportunity, let's just go. I think that was everything I kind of hoped it would be and more. I think the bit maybe I didn't expect or anticipate was that there were certain things that I was like, well, I've been in business a long time. I've run big teams. I've dealt with HR issues. I've dealt with people issues. I've had resignations. I've lost good people. I've lost bad people. That I'm ready for that. What I didn't account for was that I think having your own business, when someone resigned or left or there were people problems, it hits differently as a founder. I was kind of like, it's fine. You run a process, you let them go, you put them on performance management, you help them stay, you help them leave. I think when it's your own business, and I guess I suppose to some degree it's your own money, when you've got maybe people who aren't performing or are deliberately not working hard, I did find it quite difficult, or some instances where you take someone quite junior and you spend a year really building them up to be something really good. I did that with my sales function, SDRs and others. And then 12 months in, they go, awesome, thanks very much for the training. I'm off to like a bigger environment now. Those things hurt me much harder than I expected. And that's probably the process I probably had to spend more time on, was being able to not take that sort of thing personally. I definitely took it really, really personally. And that would have an impact on me and my mental health.
But I think that's credit to you with your empathetic kind of approach to life in general. That's something I've always kind of noticed about you, is
Thank you.
it was never driving standards by cracking the whip. It was driving standards by believing in others. I think that's a really important trait.
It's probably like a biggest strength and biggest weakness, though, isn't it? I think it's a wonderful trait. It creates great cultures. You get highly engaged teams. But I also think when you're building a business, you almost need to be able to like take a step back and just like be a little bit of a robot sometimes as well, because you're following a formula. And I definitely found there was a tension for me as a business owner between those two things, definitely. Sometimes not letting people go quick enough, sometimes being maybe a bit too sympathetic about people's situations. And I wouldn't have changed it, but I do think it means, I think the best founders, I think, can probably neatly separate those two things, which I did find hard.
And do you think that's something that can be taught, something you can learn, or is it something that some people just inherently have from day one? 21-year-old founder just knows to be ruthless.
I think I've definitely seen some founders that know to be ruthless and they can get the best of both worlds. I think for me, it was definitely a journey and a process. And I got my leadership team to help me with that. And it was kind of a case of like, look, when this happens, can you help me not to take it personally? And actually, I've seen the last few times it's happened, I've actually responded quite differently about it. It's not been like my world has ended. So I think you can. I think some people, fortunately, are innately like that. I think for someone like me, that I'm a people pleaser by history. So I think sometimes your own personal, it's a flaw, but your kind of personal characteristics are going to spill out into your business. I think you can't separate the two things easily. Your DNA is all over everything. So I think there's good things about that and not so good things about it. So I think there are some definitely 20-year-old founders who just rock up and they just get that. And there's people like me that kind of have to go through the hard bit and learn it, I think.
Yeah, I think that's a key part of being a founder is that constant journey. I mean,
yeah,
I know that having worked at Spotify, as you rightly highlighted, the big mission there, and Daniel Ek, the founder, is obviously a very, very successful founder, speaks about everyone's job should be no more than 2 years in the corporate world, because you kind of get to the point where you outgrow that job, and you're not stretched, and you're not, if you're not being stretched, then you're not overachieving, you're not being creative, you're not kind of working on the problem, you get comfortable. And I think that being a founder, it's never over. You've never hit peak.
Never over, is it? Yeah, it's interesting that and I hadn't thought of it in that lens before, but actually one of the things that I really loved about that, well, I'm in like 5.5 years now, that actually your ability to reinvent your focus. I think there's times where maybe you're super focused on sales. There's times when you're really super focused on culture, times when you may be innovating and spinning out new products. You don't always necessarily get that if you're following a more linear career path. So I quite like that. I mean, my career, it's actually the longest role I've ever had, actually, is my own business, which I definitely didn't plan to do. Kind of planned to come in for 12 months and then be a silent co-founder. And I think that was part of the reason, because you can reinvent quite a lot. I think my longest after that's 3.5 years. So I think it says quite a lot. I think Daniel's onto something there.
Yeah, it makes sense, because you're at your most effective when you have knowledge of your job, but you don't really know the solution. So you're having to work it out, and there'll be some psychological study around how people overperform when they have knowledge, but they're still exploring how to do something brilliantly. What's been the kind of, from the experience you've had, 5.5 years, as you said, what would be the highlight so far of being a founder?
I think the highlight was, when you have an idea for something, and the phrase that comes to mind is, and I don't think you can build businesses with only this mindset. There's the phrase which is kind of like, build it, they will come. And I think one of the most beautiful moments as a founder is when you've got an idea and you get that first proof of concept. Kind of like you've got an ideal customer in mind, you pitch it to them, it solves their problem. They don't even really blink about the money it costs for it, and that change hands. And I think there's just something so magical about what you believed and hoped for, and then you see that come true. It's a bit like a wish, really. You make a wish and then the wish gets realized. Might sound like a small thing, but I reckon if you asked every founder, like, kind of like, what was that first sale like? Short of, getting investment or whatever else, for me, I think that's kind of like the best proof you can get. Happy customer, right product, right fit, right money. That for me is the beautiful bit.
Absolutely. And what's been the lowest point being a founder?
I was thinking about this before this call, because there's been a lot for me. I think probably the lowest point was or can be, I think, when you've done business and you're not getting paid for it on time, and then that starts to impact the business operations. We've had a couple of very high profile clients, very well known brands that anyone would have heard of, who kind of didn't pay for sort of 12, 18 months in some cases. I think those points can be really hard. And I think when you've got lots of revenue coming in, it doesn't hurt quite so much. But, obviously the last few years have been through certain cycles, and particularly the job board is a diversity focused platform, which obviously has been a huge amount of kind of ups and downs in that as an agenda. I think when you start to have those problems, that then you're kind of worrying about whether you can meet your bills, pay your suppliers, pay staff. I think they're the really lonely bits, because I think you're the only person that truly understands the scale of the problem. And I think even your suppliers, and rightly so, your suppliers and employees just assume, invoice is due 30 days, that money's going to be there, and you do everything within your human power to make sure that happens. Most of the time you can find a way. Sometimes through no fault of your own, you might be in a situation where you can't. And I think that probably has caused the lowest points, where you literally might start the month and you're kind of like, I don't know if I can make payroll this month, or I can meet that. And you've got 2 or 3 weeks of really worrying.
Yeah.
And I think they're the low ones, because they last and they put a cloud over everything that you're doing. It changes the game. Instead of like, I'm selling stuff to build my business, you're selling stuff quickly to try and get paid, to try and meet obligations. And I think that's quite a different mindset. So that's definitely the bits that had made me feel lowest. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's really valuable. You struck on something about when it's your business, it very much feels like your money, and the impact that it has. I mean, something that I've certainly experienced over the past few years is when you're at an organization, you're at a blue chip or a big enterprise, budgets are just numbers on a spreadsheet, and they actually don't mean anything. And you can, and I think it's all relative. I mean, we spoke about the time at Spotify, pre-IPO, post-IPO. It was like the Wild West at times, in a positive way. People were just like, right, let's do this, let's do that. And it was like, we'll just get purchase ledger, just send the invoice. And almost like, because they were running so fast, a lot of these organizations run so fast, £10,000 here, £20,000, it's a rounding error, and it means nothing. And there could be a budget for a particular campaign in the advertising space or whatever. It's millions and millions. And if it was like 1.032 million or 1.034 million, doesn't really, whatever. But actually, to a small business, £2,000 invoice is like, that's the difference between, us not being able to make full payroll or making payroll.
Exactly that. Yeah.
And there's this, because both of us did accountancy recruitment for a while, we spoke to a lot of accountants, and it was all about budget responsibility. Did you have sign off from the P&L? And I know for a fact, my sister was an accountant, or still is an accountant for a long time. There was an organisation that she worked for, huge business that works in alcohol, whether it be alcohol or cigarettes, anything with duty related. These organisations, their revenue was so high, and their accounting software at one point they were using like Excel to do their accounting, and their rounding errors were tens of millions.
Oh gosh!
And it's just literally, it just fell down the back of the sofa, and then there's the small businesses where it's like, okay, I have 9 members of staff, or I have this member of staff, I need X amount to make payroll. And then you're saying to them, look, I really do this invoice. And they're like, yeah, of course it'll be paid. Because the implication of their credit rating when they're doing 15 billion a year in revenue, it doesn't really matter. And that individual who runs that team or that budget, there's no, they care because they, but do they actually care? Does it actually mean anything to them if they miss it?
No, it doesn't. And I guess, if you're doing work with corporates where they've got onboarding processes to allow the finance people to pay you, and this was the bit where I suppose my paranoia starts to kick in, is that sometimes we'd have to do that for a £500 bundle of adverts, for example, where you need to go through quite a heavy onboarding process. If you make one small mistake on the form, or maybe like the Excel sheet hasn't kind of like, formatted properly, that could mean a 6-month delay in getting paid or something like that, because nobody knows there's a problem. It's just like the computer saying, no, the money's not coming. So for a very long time, probably the first 3 years, I was personally doing all of that onboarding stuff, because I just knew that, to cut a corner over here means we're not going to get paid over there. And I suppose as the business owner, that was something I just wasn't willing to take a chance on.
Yeah, and with purchase ledger and sales ledger all becoming automated or outsourced,
Right.
you actually sometimes just can't even speak to somebody, but like, hey, there's just an error on the invoice. Any chance we can get this resolved?
No,
Computer says no.
computer says no. There's a very famous car brand, one of the biggest German ones, and I had to reconcile it at some point to work out how much work and effort had gone in to actually get paid. It was over 300 emails. They'd sent us the training manual on what we needed to do 45 times. There were also 15 calls in there. I think we dealt with like 15 different people, and it was like literally like in this loop going round where it was like IT support would say, no, you need to speak to finance. Finance would say, no, you need to speak to IT support. And this went on for 5 or 6 months, So that's some of those things where you're just like, how many hours did that actually
Yeah.
cost? Yeah.
And it turns out the invoice was actually £200.
I know. That wasn't quite. I think that one was £3,000, so not too bad. But even still, like the time I spent on it must have been maybe £20,000, probably genuinely the cost of that.
Yeah,
payment.
and it's not like you're a builder. You can go around and just take the windows out of the building you just made.
This was in job adverts, sadly not. No.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Let's talk about it from a kind of the darker side of being a founder and the difficulties of it. Obviously, you and I, as I said, we've known each other a long time, and being a founder has a massive impact on you both mentally and physically. First of all, how are you?
I'm very good, thank you. So I'm 3.5 years post having quite serious colon cancer. My health at the moment is now like probably healthier than I've ever been, actually, in all honesty. But I guess like anything, you're never too sure when you might spot a symptom, or it could be quite serious. So yeah, I had quite a serious health scare.
And
Years
how?
back while I was running the business, yeah.
And obviously, a health scare such as that in any walk of life is terrifying. It's, I mean, your parent, your husband, your friend to a lot of people, etc. And often people forget about the impact it has on both physical and mental health. But then if you're working for, I don't know, big blue chip organization, there's sick leave, there's private health, private medical. You can get the best. I mean, when we were at Robert Half, we had Bupa, I think, we had HCA and everything. Anything that happened, it was very much happened in days, sorted. But as a founder, having to take time off work for literally a life-threatening situation, how did that affect you, the family, because you run the company with your wife, and the bigger impacts on you?
Let's maybe start with the positive bit, because I guess the nice thing was not having to go through, I guess, an HR type process where you've got to kind of, I suppose, ask for leave and they tell you what the policies and the processes are and things like that. I genuinely had we mentioned the word freedom earlier, but I genuinely had the freedom to be able to go, okay, cool, I need to take 30 days off, a month off at least, and then there's the recovery time. No problem. I think the bit though that you don't necessarily anticipate is that when you're not well enough to work on your business. I mean, in my case, I had to have major surgery. I didn't eat anything for 2 weeks. Kind of had to retrain yourself to, even the operation meant you have to train your lungs to breathe again, and you need physio just to walk again. So there is the whole kind of physical piece. And I can remember one day, I guess probably this might connect or resonate with some founders. Like I got caught by one of the nurses doing some work in my hospital bed, probably about 4 days after the surgery. And I remember her kind of having a word with me, going like, "I hope that's not work." And I lied and said, "No, I'm just it's just a computer that I use. It's easier than trying to type on my phone." And I was like, "Okay, I've been caught here." I'm not sure I told anyone that, by the way. It's the first time I've said that out loud, because it was during COVID, so there weren't many visitors and things. So there's definitely, I suppose, that kind of like reality check that you get, that you are not well enough probably to be able to continue in the business. And I think the other bit is, I mean, I had a month off, which was great, but when I came back, I realised that there were some parts of the business that I probably wasn't able to handle or deal with. And look, I like a lot of the sales stuff, as I know you do too, Tom. But I found that, when sometimes you get the kind of client who actually doesn't really get you, or when you get like a recurring sales pitch that goes the way you don't want it to go, I found that unbelievably triggering. And there was actually one client call where I really cut somebody down, obviously a prospective client, and I had to apologize. Well, I didn't have to, but I wanted to apologize afterwards, and I had to explain to her and say, "Look, I'm so sorry. That was out of character. I've been through this. I'm not trying to make an excuse for it, but I wouldn't normally have lashed out at you like that." And thankfully, she was very nice about it, and we did actually still get the work. But it then meant I had to delegate quite a lot of the stuff even after I'd come back that I would have normally done, just because I wasn't mentally in the right place for it as well. That, I suppose, resilience just wasn't there in the same way.
And how did it affect you? I would say it's a co-founder,
Yeah.
you and your wife. As I'm sure I can make the huge assumption here, she was incredible, very supportive. Did you ever think about the impact it had on her and the business from that perspective? Because you have to care about yourself in that moment in time, because you are a very empathetic person who's always looking after other people. At that moment, I'm sure people said, "Luke, you need to focus on you, not on others."
No, yeah, totally, and you're absolutely right. And actually, like, whenever anyone talks to me or I hear of anyone that's going through something serious like that, I always say, that mental health is quite a big thing for me. I lost a dear friend to suicide, so I'm always kind of quite mindful of the impact that things can have, not just on a person but wider people. I think whenever there's somebody who has a major illness in a family or a friend group, or anyone that you're close to, it creates almost like a wound across lots and lots of different things. So I know that my wife and co-founder, it was an incredibly tough time for her, and I know that she had to go and seek her own support away from, I guess, what you'd often get from a husband or a wife or a relationship, because I guess just I wasn't able to do that. Thankfully, she's got a good support structure in place. A lot of other founders that she's part of a group and a network who've had their own struggles and own challenges and things like that. But you have to almost you have to go and seek solace somewhere else. And you think about the co-founder relationship, it's quite a special bond that you have, that I just wasn't at the races for at least a month, probably a bit longer. Luckily, we had a long-term leadership team, so we definitely leaned a lot more than normal on the others as well. But yeah, it creates a hell of a thing. And I think particularly when you go through something life-threatening, it really, I think it's changed me forever. And Tom, and I'm finding out what some of those things are now. If you genuinely face death, and look at it and go, what if my outcome is 3 months to live, or it could be 30 years? How am I going to live my life differently in both those instances? I think it's kind of impossible not to have that. So I've asked her about it a few times. She doesn't like to talk about it too much. I think it was quite a dark period, and I know my dad came over and stayed during the whole period, so that there was less of the childcare stuff and things, because I was literally in like a kind of a room on my own for about a month or so, just like sleeping and trying to get better and injecting myself with different things and trying to heal certain wounds and stuff. Like, you're not a husband, you're not a co-founder during that period.
Yeah, it must have been incredibly tough for all of you. And you touched on it about the resilience part.
Yeah.
What have you taken out of it? You said that there's a few things you're starting to realise you have a very different approach on things. How have you noticed how you've changed? I know for a fact you're a lot fitter now. You run a lot of marathons and half marathons. I remember the days at Robert Half where there was no marathons going on.
No, there were no marathons, and I guess anyone that's UK British drinking culture, particularly recruitment, those things went very nicely together, very nicely. Which I don't do any of that stuff anymore. But I think the stuff that for me was that when you think maybe I haven't got as long as I thought I had, and I think that's definitely could be in business, could be in life. For me, anyway, I started thinking about the things that I really loved that I hadn't done, and I always had a childhood dream to run marathons. I remember like giving out the drinks, with the drinks where you give them out on the race and stuff. I did that as like an 8-year-old, 9-year-old, and that was implanted that one day. And in my head, I was always like, too busy at work. I'm too focused on career. I'll get to it at some point. And I guess when you're like in your 40s and then you have a life-threatening disease, you kind of go, maybe I'm not going to get to it. So for me, I suppose one of the things I did was to go, okay, what are the things that bring me joy? So I run a lot now. Like I love that. It's great for my mental health. It's great for fitness. I realized I'd stopped going to gigs and live music, something that I absolutely adore. So I made space for that and time for that. And then sometimes I get tempted to cancel. I'm like, oh, it's been a really busy day, or I'll just quickly send that sales pitch. Whereas now I'm like, Luke, just go. It's only 2 or 3 hours. You can get up half an hour early in the morning if you want, still send the sales pitch. Like it'll still be there. So those those things have changed. But I think the bit that I wasn't expecting was once I got through the physical bit, so I was physically well enough to go back to work and stuff, there was then the mental bit. And that's had a whole host of things that I wasn't expecting. For example, even things like the anniversary of the year of the operation, the body like keeps score. And that's an expression I'd always heard a lot, but never really understood, that your body almost starts to associate that time of year with going through something quite dangerous to your body. So I was having like, I never really get anxiety and stuff. I was having huge anxiety towards the anniversary of the operation, and like worry, like waking up in like cold sweats and stuff and things. And I did go and get quite a lot of therapy to help me like process that, because there's the trauma of going through something like that that's life threatening out of nowhere, and these things all have an impact. So a lot of changes, and I suppose the big thing for me is like I deal with problems a lot better now, like health issues, any small thing. Sleep's a lot more important, food's a lot more important. Care a lot more.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I mean, I remember reading a book, The Secrets of Sand Hill, Sand Hill Road, about venture capital, and one of the parts in that spoke about the health of founders,
Right.
and it quite clearly states, and the book's written by one of the founders of Andreessen Horowitz. So obviously, for those who don't know, one of the biggest VCs in the world. And they openly say that no VC will ever look down on founders who budget for mental health and support for themselves. Because they said if they're investing 1, 3, 50, 100 to 500, sometimes billions into a founder, they need them to be at their top performance. And if there's things that they're going through that they're struggling with, anything they can do to make the founder better, they'll support. And if that's $500 a month, £1,000 a month on the founding group to ensure that they are at peak and that both mentally and physically, no decent investor will ever bat an eyelid at that.
I didn't know that, and I'm so happy to hear it, because I think I kind of stumbled across mine, but she was got like a mix of therapy and also business coach. So actually, in the periods when I didn't need mental health support, she was amazing for like running ideas by like, I've got this situation at work, I've got this problem, having that kind of coaching bit as well, because it can be lonely. I'm really happy to hear that. That's amazing.
Yeah, it's a real positive thing. I mean, on the subject of VCs, tell us about your fundraising journey. Are you bootstrapped? Did you raise from angel? Did you raise from venture capital, private equity? How did you find that journey? And any anecdotes you have? Because people have always got stories about investors or the investor journey.
So to date, we are still bootstrapped. And it's weird because when you're asking me the question, I was kind of like, okay, what's the VC journey been like? And I was gonna answer it positively, and then I was like, okay, but we haven't actually raised. So clearly, there's a journey in there and a story in there, because we have tried to raise and have been on the fundraising journey quite a lot. So I suppose the nice thing was we were able to start the business with very little capital investment, which was amazing, and we started generating revenue really quickly. I think like maybe month 3 was the first sale, and actually, kind of serious revenue was coming in from sort of 5-6 months in, which, and there were a lot of things that were quite fortunate for us in that. I suppose I founded the job board with Cynthia, my co-founder, and my wife 8 months before the George Floyd COVID situation. So obviously there was a massive external thing that happened that meant that we were kind of in the right place at the right time from a business point of view. The challenge we've had, though, is I suppose like any business, you get to a certain size and scale, and to move on to the next level, particularly for us, kind of spending money on brand and marketing. And we tried a bit of TV advertising and things, and we'd done it all quite low key, but we'd seen there were like really amazing results from putting the brand out there. So we were desperate to get some investment to help us really build on that and scale on it. Super fortunate that there's something called Media for Equity that's around, where you can get, TV companies, and there was a big one that wanted to invest in us in exchange for TV advertising or branding and marketing, but it came with a matched investment deal. So whatever they were going to put in kind, you'd need to match from a VC. We had an awesome VC that was lined up, a fund that was female led as well. The challenge we had, though, was a US investor, and the investment relied on Kamala Harris becoming president of the United States, not Donald Trump. So we had a long time kind of watching the election and waiting, and
quite a binary outcome, that.
Ridiculously binary outcome. An amazing learning journey, because I think in the early days of trying to get investment, you kind of place all of your success on, am I going to get it or aren't it? And this, I guess, we're kind of 2 or 3 years down the line with that I've kind of reached a point where if it happened, amazing. If it had, genuinely, I was at peace with it, which I think therapy definitely helped, and coaching definitely helped with that. But the journey prior to that, bit of a mixed bag, to be honest. I mean, look, I'm a co-founder with a woman, a black woman. Lots of conversations have had are super supportive about that. There's been others though where you read about the things and you hope they're not true. For example, sometimes like people would forget to introduce Cynthia or speak to her in a meeting. Sometimes like there'd be questions that probably should go to her that would come to me as the kind of the white man in the group. Sometimes when people like talk over her and wouldn't talk over me. So some of those things that you kind of read about on LinkedIn on the posts, those things are there. Very difficult to get to be taken seriously quite a lot, even though we had a highly profitable revenue generating business. There was still a lot suspicious around like, oh, it can't be a real business because it's run by a black woman. And there was one horrible example where we were I think it was an invoice-finance firm that we'd been fully approved to receive some invoice finance, and we got to the point where you needed to kind of send passport photos or driving license and things like that. And all of a sudden, at that point, there were like extra checks out of nowhere suddenly got introduced, and the only thing we could think is like that was a done deal up until that point. Then all of a sudden, somebody else got involved later. And you don't want to put two and two together and make five, but you kind of go, but actually, what was the only reason why maybe there was these extra steps? And in the end, thankfully, we had another offer from another provider who didn't do that, and we just walked away from it. But you see some things like that, like unconscious bias, or where the system is somewhat rigged. I mean, we know the data with female founders getting a tiny percentage. You then start throwing in black female founders into the mix as well, and that percentage is like it's way less than a single percent. It's kind of probably 0.0 something.
Yeah, I read something this week that said that 3% of VC capital goes to female founders, but on average, female founders return 3.5x, whereas male founders return like 1x.
Yeah,
and it's like actually all the data is supportive. I mean, it's a subject, and obviously incredibly well around the impacts of diversity in leadership, and it's not as binary as okay, everybody will all found, if everyone in the world founded a business, there's different reasons for it. Some different personalities, different socioeconomic backgrounds. That's why people start businesses. So it's not as simple as that. No. But there is a lot of untapped talent, and I am really kind of impressed over the past couple of years actually of how many female-led funds there are. I mean, we're backed by Seedcamp, and Seedcamp's managing partner is female, Reshma, and she's one of the only handful of female lead in kind of tier one VCs around, and she's obviously very much a vocal champion of that. And I'm seeing women in VC groups, so it is improving. Yeah, but in general, I mean, we've both been through the journey. I've probably spoken to or been introduced to or met 100 odd funds over the past few years, and I would say that a good 70-75% are white men. I think if anything, the gender imbalance is one thing, but actually I think the demographic and the racial imbalance is something that socioeconomics is another really big one. I mean, there is one fund that we come across, I mean, I won't name names, who are very much the antithesis of that. They're very much working class background and people who have come from nothing and done good, but there is still that reputation, and these rumours and these stigmas come from somewhere. And when you go and meet a VC and it's a 24-year-old public school educated, it's just a bit samey, and I can understand the challenges around that of being a couple of married founders of different backgrounds going in and meeting a 24-year-old. It needs to change. It needs to get better.
And it's difficult because I think you also need to look in the mirror when you're having these conversations and take the feedback and the pointers and everything. And it's trying to get that blend right. But also there's a lot of advice that you get that frankly is just like, people aren't really paying attention, or just, it's not the right time or the mood or whatever else too either. So I think it's one of those tricky ones. But I think it's probably a bit about timing, but I think there's also an opportunity for a lot of business, not all of them, but some, if you are able to try and look at alternative routes to building your business. And I think there's lots of other ways to look at it as well. I think certainly when we were doing it, it felt like that was the journey we had to go on. Actually, we're probably a bit more open-minded now, particularly as we move forward. It'd be great if we got investment, we're still open to it, it's still part of the journey, but actually kind of, the opportunity to And Cynthia was in China just a few weeks ago, for example, and you start tapping into markets like that are kind of like different types of investment, like technology firms who haven't got a brand, for example, but have the tech, how you can kind of merge and things like this kind of alternative routes. So yeah, it's been an
Yeah,
interesting journey.
I think investment as well is, especially within technology, people generally think it's
Yeah.
VC only, and that's all
Yeah.
you can do. Is
Yeah.
if 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 you're building a technology platform, B2B SaaS, AI is obviously the buzzword at the moment, or has been for the past couple of years or so, that the only way you can fund that business is by being venture backed and becoming a unicorn in 5 years. When actually there's a lot of, well, there's not as many angels in the UK nowadays because they're all leaving because of the tax implications, but actual private capital, private liquidity, you don't need billions to start or to do technology. Yes, you do need some seed money quite often, but actually that can be 50,000, 75,000, 100,000. And actually you doesn't need to come from one person. You can £5,000 from here, £5,000 from there, and it's about networking and getting around people. So anybody who's kind of listening to this and thinks that the only way to build a software platform is you have to go and raise hundreds, and that's a big mistake we made. 100%. We just thought the only way we can get money is by speaking to VCs.
Of course, yeah, which is understandable, isn't it? I think, and I suppose, tech in theory is becoming cheaper as well, isn't it? So actually, it can be quite easy to start a business if you've got an idea, and actually, the tech's starting to come down now. I know when we were looking at we got quotes for, because we rented our technology to get started to have an MVP, and that was the way we did it, and we looked at kind of what it would cost to buy the tech, and it was huge amounts. But if we went to market now to try and buy the tech, it would be much cheaper than it was sort of two or three years ago. Yeah,
absolutely. And how was that kind of the fundraising, and then obviously then deciding bootstrapping and kind of focusing on revenue generating? How has that shaped your approach to what you're doing at the moment and your strategy in the immediate and kind of midterm?
Yeah, I think we've had to take probably a slightly patient view on it. So a lot of the ideas that we've got, particularly around how to scale to the next level and things like that, they do require some kind of event to happen. So I guess what we've taken the opportunity to do, though, is I suppose get as ready as you can do to the next stage. One of the things that I've learned, particularly when you're kind of in hyper growth, that often you just kind of you throw money in people situations, try and solve it because you can. I think when you're bootstrapped and maybe you're in a market when the market conditions aren't quite so great, I think you get much more creative at how you solve problems. And that's often through process. It's often through looking at who your kind of partner or vendor relationships are. One of the things I think we got really smart at was kind of looking at resellers of the platform and product. I was always build your own sales team and do it all yourself. And then you start to go, but actually as part of this ecosystem, particularly for us, there's agencies and there's other people that do this. And actually, if you find a way to make them invested in you and what you're doing and they get a cut for your sales, before you know it, you've got a sales army that you're only paying when you get results come in, and actually it's only a small percentage of the sale that you're then paying out to someone else. And things like that were just stuff that I would not have thought of or focused on when you're in the kind of the really glory bit, or when you're chasing the investments. So I think to answer the question specifically, I think is about planning for the next phase and next level to increase the chances of success as much as possible, but also just taking the opportunity to get creative. Okay, try the VC route, hasn't come for us now, but that door's still open. What about the next route? What opportunities does China present, or other non-traditional markets maybe where we've not looked at these things? So probably, and I think it's probably not to get too down on yourself as well. If you have a few flat years, which is what the last couple of years have been a bit flattish for us. If someone had said to me 3 years ago, you're going to have 2 flat years, I'd have been like, well, that's not very ambitious. But actually in the current climate, surviving, getting through, having some flat years, being ready for the next wave, there's something to be said. I think something to be said for that too.
And I think because of what you do and your platform does, it brings immense value, but it also is topical, and it can very topical depending on which way the political winds are blowing that year. I mean, obviously, very clearly in the US, you mentioned obviously since the change in government, the now kind of state policy over there is there are no programs in any public institution, which obviously is then triggered. I mean, Microsoft have cancelled their programs, etc., etc. So when you see a whole industry, a whole country, a whole economy, the biggest economy in the world, go, actually, my solution, which was doing really well over there, as a whole society have now said, we reject this idea overnight. It's just like saying, oh yeah, we use software for our accounting. actually, no,
Totally.
we don't use software anymore. It'd be like, whoa, what? It's just the
Totally.
whole market
Yeah.
changes.
Well, any founders who I think are thinking about, they've got a range of ideas they would pick with, I would definitely, there's obviously huge pros to it. When the wind's behind you, you enjoy ridiculous success. But I think trying to build a business on such heavy external factors, yeah, yeah,
Yeah, it's kind of like anybody who's involved in green energy and net zero at the moment. They're
right,
probably thinking what's going to happen over the next few
right,
months.
right. Yeah, yeah,
Morally, ethically, really important thing to
totally.
do. But
Yeah,
ultimately, if the government decides it's no longer important,
yeah.
then guess what? Private industry probably doesn't think it's
That
important
important
anymore.
either, yeah. And I think that why is it so many businesses don't make it to the next stage and things? I think because there's so many things, particularly now when we're in this world where there is a huge amount of change and political shifts. Yeah, it can be difficult to know. Is your idea proofed from that
Yeah,
or not?
yeah. If you're, yeah, it just shows how flippant business can be
Flippant is the
as
right
well.
word. Yeah, yeah. And I think you've
There's-
got to be at peace with that. It's like I could sit back
yeah.
and go, all those things, how brilliant we were as a business when there was the external factors behind us. Well, actually, we probably got off to a better start than we should have done, and there were some good things about that, but some bad things. It meant you kind of enjoy success before, in some degree, you're maybe ready for it process wise.
And that's the thing with popular culture. I mean, you can almost liken it to popular culture and fashion. Like you
Yeah.
think of Burberry. Burberry, obviously, for generations was this iconic historic brand. You then get into a world of like the late 90s, early noughties, where football hooliganism completely destroyed the brand. And now,
So
the 90s fashion has now come back in, and Burberry's now huge again. And it's like
crazy, isn't it? Yeah,
you can't forecast someone making
you
Football
can't.
Factory or Green Street.
No. And Nike's having its moment where it's not in a good spell, and then
Yeah,
the New Balance got some smart marketing people
yeah.
in who use the TikTok trends, and now New Balance is trending after it, and you're just kind of like, wow, okay. So,
Can't
same products,
Kanye
same
with
product.
Adidas. I mean, obviously that's a bigger story. But when they
Yeah,
signed him, he was the number one artist in the world, and he
right.
goes and does some pretty questionable things.
Yeah, yeah,
So, yes, sometimes, and I think this is something that I've learned as a founder over probably over the past 3 or 4 months. Actually, it's taken me this long to get it. Is that it doesn't matter how much you try and how much you have responsibility, accountability, and I think
yeah.
to a certain point, there's research on this that most founders are slight psychopaths to a certain point because they have to have ultimate accountability. Everything sits on their
Yes,
shoulders, and they feel like
yes,
they have to have extreme ownership
yes,
of everything. And it is a positive trait to have to a limit.
yes,
Sometimes it's out of your control.
yes.
And
Such a good point, yeah, and being at peace enough that you still kick into action when these things happen because there's things that you need to do, but not carry what's going on with our
yeah,
VC thing with the US outcome. Imagine if I'd had the whole build up to that, my life riding on the outcome of the US election. I mean, that would
yeah.
have been just
I
mentally.
mean, you are an influential guy, but I'm not sure you can swing the US election.
I mean, I've been to my own household. That's probably about as far as it goes, Tom. And even then, it's quite questionable. It's questionable,
We want independence. We want people to have their own voices.
right?
And kind of hits me onto something that actually is in your control.
Yeah,
If you think about last 5.5 years,
yeah,
there's failures where you made the right choice, but things haven't gone right. But what about things? Is there an example you have in your mind where you actually made a mistake? People were saying do it one way. You said no, I'm definitely doing it this way. Or you now look back and hold your hands up and went, I did the wrong thing there. Do you have any examples like that?
there's a couple of things where I guess with the benefit of hindsight, I definitely would have done things differently. And I actually think these are probably things that most founders could think about. And and there are a couple of small things initially, but actually, if the business does well, I think they can become quite big things quite quickly. So the first one I wanted to talk to was when you're buying the domains for your product. And I guess, you kind of might buy a few and you buy some different versions and there's different costs attached to what those are, whether it's .io or .ai or .com and things like that. What I wasn't anticipating was, particularly if you're starting a B2C brand and you've got desires to become global with the B2C brands, or even a B2B, that how important the .com might be or become. And what I didn't realize is there are other organizations out there who I guess kind of track things like how much internet traffic certain web domains are getting and then do a safety check to see if they've bought the .com or not. And then, kind of you start enjoying a bit of success. You're so focused on, I'm building this business. Look at me. I'm so cool. And then you go, oh, hang on a minute, someone's asked us if we've got the .com, or the VCs have asked, oh, have you got .com and stuff? And then you dig into it and you look into it and you see, oh yeah, somebody bought it 18 months ago, and oh, they're open to selling it, but the price is $20,000 or $30,000 and things like that. I think as soon as you can afford it, buy the .com, because that was a big chunk of money that we had to spend on that. That was definitely a mistake, because I can remember like maybe having it even in my basket at one point, kind of going like, oh, can I justify the £200 a year or something? It wasn't very much. That mistake cost us $18,000 in the end, much later. And I think the other one would be is get a finance person in as quick as possible before you need it to get paid on time. I did not realize, and it was definitely a mistake. And I guess when things were going really, really well, I didn't need somebody to be doing this, because there was enough money to pay for everything. It was only as the market started to turn, and I suppose the need to get paid on time became more important. Without having someone focused on that, there was probably like maybe 6 months of work to get all of that tidy, and where things had fallen between cracks and we were just never going to get paid and things like that. That should sit with someone, and I don't think I'd realised just how important. And again, that was probably me, my kind of overconfidence, which was, and I had this weird system where I quite liked on a Friday night, like doing some invoicing, checking on stuff, like it was giving me joy. But you think about that as a scalable process that's good for the business, and that was definitely I suppose an ego thing. Isn't it nice? I'm counting up the cash on a Friday night type thing. Definitely a early founder mistake, I think.
And last couple of questions. Do you have a funny anecdote, an experience, something that you just look back and go, I can't believe that happened? There must be some examples.
So there is one, but I think it's not that uncommon a story. But it was, and it's kind of funny when you look back on it, but it's absolutely horrifying at the time. That if you've got like an internet brand, particularly where people are able to purchase your product, you've got Stripe attached to it, and people can, no humans interacting. I didn't realize that we had somebody that had literally launched a copycat business, and they were generating traffic directly to themselves. I think I found out about 2 months in, and I remember doing the good recruiting thing, Tom, that I was able to kind of hunt this person down. Start to put together bits of information. Look at their company name, get a little bit of detail, pop it out on LinkedIn, get a bit of detail, kind of piece that picture together. So I found who the person was, and I reached out expecting the person to be like, oh yeah, cool, you've caught me, no problem. And he was just like very aggressive, going like, I've got you, no worries, I'm going to make as much money out of you as I can while I can, and all the rest of it. From there, so I don't know if it's a funny story or not, but I remember, and I was grateful actually that we had copyrighted we patented the brand and the logo, so legally the person wasn't allowed to do it. We were able to use that protection. It took about 6 months, cost quite a lot of lawyers, but I suppose the nice thing was he'd purchased a few similar domains that were then legally ours to have. So the end story was quite good. But I mean, I've heard stories from Just Eat when we first started working with them, Tom, where they talked about like a company that literally had cloned their website, and that went on for about 18 months, 2 years, and the cost of that is huge. So I don't know if it's a funny story, but I think anyone with like a kind of a web-based brand that's got consumer traffic to it, I think it's a very normal story. So it felt wild at the time. I was like, what, this goes on, this is a thing, how do we fix it? Like, great thing to reflect back on, but you kind of imagine at the time going like, okay, how do I use my copyright brand here, and what lawyers do I need to get involved, and how do I make this not cost too much, and all that stuff. Like, it was a hell of a process. But
yes, it sounds familiar. There's a mutual friend of ours, but I'm pretty sure you know him. He had an AI clone of his company last week, the week before. Someone had created essentially the same on LinkedIn, so the same company name but with one letter different. Created a whole an actual owner profile. The offering and the business was very, very similar. Kind of like it was the same service but with a slight difference on it. And very, very quickly he was like, look, can you, to all of his WhatsApp was like, can you help? And I literally just did a reverse image search of this woman who was supposed to be the CEO of this company, and it literally was an AI generated image. And he commented on their on this individual's LinkedIn being like, you're not real, what are you doing? They're like, I am real. What are you talking about? And it's like, we then sent the screenshot of the avatar being like, this is the AI generated image that you're claiming to be you. You're not real. And then all of a sudden they disappeared. It's just
They
like
just went, yeah.
there's so many scammers out there, and
Yeah, there are. And then now they can use AI to do it. I mean, I was able to speak to the person once, and I think then he changed the number or took the number down or something like that. But now you're dealing with an AI version. That's even harder, isn't it?
and they can do it at scale. They can do
At
mass
scale.
scale,
Right.
thousands of different clones in minutes. But
Right.
cool. Final question.
Mhm.
If there's one thing, if you were to do it all again, how would you not do it as a founder?
How would I not do it as a founder? I would focus much, much more on process and technology and not just hiring a person every time I was like, oh, that's not fixed, I'm going to add someone. Because it's not efficient, it's not scalable. And that's probably, I come from a recruiting background, so I guess you often do see people as the answer to those problems. But I think there's a lot to be said with sitting up with a problem slightly longer and not always solving that by just adding more people to the mix.
Absolutely. Very, very good advice. Well, look, Luke Davis, thank you so much for your time today. And if people want to try and find you, where do they find you? Where do they find Diversifying?
So diversifying.io or diversifying.com.
Very good, very good. Thank you. See you later.
Great to see you.